You know that moment when someone names something about you that you've never had words for, and suddenly you feel seen? Seen in a way that's not necessarily flattering or critical, just really real. That's what this podcast is about.
On every episode of Seen by Birkman, we explore real stories, practical applications, and honest conversations about what it actually looks like to be understood through the power of perception.
Not as a label, not as a type, but as a whole person.
This is a place where human data meets human depth.
I'm Amy.
And I'm Torri.
And this is Seen by Birkman. Before we get started today, I want to ask our listeners a question. Who in your life, whether it's a sibling, a partner, a boss, a friend, that just gets you? Not because they've lived your same life, not because they've had the same experiences as you, but because when you're with them, you feel real. That feeling, that's being seen.
I feel grateful to have one of those people right across from me right now and to get to have so many conversations with you all the time that kind of create that feeling seen experience. I think it's really important that we start off our very first episode of Feeling Seen by defining what this means to us and what this means to Birkman.
Yep.
And what feeling seen really is about, it's an emotional experience of accurately understanding somebody's intentions and their motivations and their inner world without actually having to be that person or be in their experience.
Yeah.
And of course, we know at Birkman that Birkman has been helping people feel seen since 1951.
A long time.
A very long time. And what we also know is that humans have had this need to feel seen from even way before then.
Right, because it's not extra, it's ancient.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more about what that really means?
The brain is very old, and if we go back to kind of the beginning of humanity, not being seen wasn't just an outcome of loneliness, it was actually dangerous. So being part of the group, being seen by the group meant you didn't get left behind. It meant that you got the resources that you need, and ultimately it was safety. And so when the body senses that it's not being seen, it actually sets off a biological response, and that impacts the nervous system. And that's why this feeling of, pain or panic sets in, because the body is actually sending out an alarm to say, like, we are physically at risk. So We think of it as this maybe emotional experience, and it certainly is, but emotions are tied to biology. Mm-hmm. And so when we are having an emotional response, there is a root of that is actually biological. That's kind of the historical element of it. But if you think about it, it also then is recreated when you're a baby. Not being seen means that you don't get what you need to stay alive. And so we've learned from literally the beginning of our lives that being seen was essential to being alive, getting what we needed, whether that was food or attention. And so this concept of needing to be included, needing to be seen, kind of continues and restarts at the beginning of everyone's life and continues through.
So given that probably most people listening to this podcast aren't actually babies.
Right.
And we've evolved to where we can get, an Amazon delivery at our doorstep. How does this relate to people in the workplace today? And why does all of this matter right now?
When you kind of think about what it means to be seen at work, it's, am I noticed? And if I'm not noticed, I'm not going to be recognized. And if I'm not recognized, how am I going to be identified as someone that maybe should be promoted or noticed for a job well done? If you think about this experience of being in a meeting and you have an idea and you're not sure if it's a great idea or a terrible idea, and you speak up and everyone in the room goes quiet, you have a physical response to that. And it's it's very uncomfortable. It could be borderline painful. And it's because your body is sending out these like radars that something's wrong and that you're potentially going to be left out of the group. And I think it's important to tie what we're talking about in terms of being seen to sort of these evolutionary roots, and then even kind of the biological roots of being a newborn baby, because it's not a new concept, right? And so we talk about it maybe in a new way, but we're literally wired for this. And that's why when we are seen, it feels so good and so fulfilling, and it feels like connection. And when we're not seen, it's such an uncomfortable, borderline terrifying experience.
Right, absolutely. So people are they're literally hardwired to want to feel seen. We know that this is not easy. This is why there's going to be an entire podcast about helping people feel more seen and creating spaces to feel more seen. And so it's going to not only help individuals feel like they are seen and connected to and have stronger relationships, but for anybody who's running a company and listening to this as a leader managing a team, what benefits did they get from feeling seen? Because we know that they're busy and that this is hard.
It's interesting, and I think we'd be remiss not to mention that we're living at this moment in time when, in a way, we've never been more seen. You and I would describe it as more exposed, right? Because it's not authentic seeing. It's not authentic validation. We've never been more seen/exposed. And yet the rates of loneliness are at a epidemic level, right? And so trying to reconcile those two things. And what is at the heart of that is that we're not being seen. Right. We're being exposed, or we're alone. We're not making connections. And so in that way, I don't know that there's ever been a more timely moment to have these types of conversations.
Well, and even on top of that, with the emergence of AI only growing exponentially, we need humans to be able to be more human than they've ever been before.
Right.
And you can't be fully human unless you truly feel seen. And you have that understanding and you get the emotional validation from people, and people move forward in a way that you mattered, not that you're just scrolled by.
Yeah, I think we're at the moment where your competitive edge is your humanness.
Yes. And companies will have a competitive edge by creating more spaces where people can feel seen and be their human real selves.
Yeah,
I love that. So then why is it seen by Birkman?
So the reason why this podcast is seen by Birkman is because Birkman plays a really powerful role in allowing people to be seen. And so let's talk a little bit about, without getting too much into the Birkman, but why the Birkman is the tool that allows this to happen. So first, we often are going to refer to Birkman as a personality assessment, but that's actually not completely true. It's actually an assessment of perception. And so what we're measuring is how a person is perceiving the world, how a person is making sense of the world. And when you review someone's Birkman, to me, it's really like putting on a pair of glasses and seeing the world through that person's pair of eyes. And I would argue that that's maybe the closest you're ever going to get, based on what we currently have available to us, to actually seeing like, wow, when you look at the world, this is what you see, and this is how it makes sense to you. And this feels normal and good, and this feels uncomfortable and not good. At the heart of this is that almost everything we're talking about are invisible forces. And so we're trying to put some kind of concrete element and some form of tangibility on top of all of these very powerful dynamics that are happening that are completely unseen. And so part of what Birkman does is we have this concept of needs and the environments you're most comfortable in, and those are completely hidden. And so you can't know that about a person unless they're able to articulate that about themselves and they have an awareness of that about themselves. Or if you have a Birkman in front of you and you can actually say, oh, like it looks like you need downtime away from the group, or you want quick decisions from other people, right? So this element of invisibility, that by creating an assessment, we can actually see and have something concrete to be able to talk about.
Absolutely. Birkman makes the invisible visible through the power of perception.
Yes, exactly.
And Dr. Birkman had such tremendous insights in being able to understand this so many years ago, and he was so ahead of his time. Where did that start with him?
Yeah, it's interesting because, we put a lot of emphasis on his origin story, and there is, a really interesting aspect to that story where he was a B-17 bomber pilot. He had these really intense, amazing experiences when he was fighting in World War II. His crew that he flew with was very important to him. They all survived the war. They survived 19 missions. But I actually think, while that's an interesting story, it goes further back than that. And I think it goes to who he was as a person. And so Roger Birkman was, as he would say, painfully shy, very introverted. He would say that when he was a child, he would get embarrassed and his cheeks would turn red. And having different parenting styles back then, they would make fun of him and be like, oh, don't be embarrassed. And they would call it out, which is actually the worst thing you can do for a person that feels embarrassed. He was a people person, but not in terms of what we think. He was a people observer. And I think he studied humans from the time he was little and almost in an obsessive way. Like, what are they thinking? What's motivating them? And he did describe that he, growing up, and I think well into his teenage and maybe young adult years, maybe he always did, he felt a sense of apartness from people. He felt that somehow he wasn't included. We would say he didn't feel seen. And I think that intellectually he believed, if I can understand people, then I can figure out how to connect to them. And it's real, right? And I think that no one really tells that part of his story very often. And it's much more exciting and glamorous to tell the Hollywood version about, his history and fighting in World War II, and not to take anything away from that, because it meant a lot to him, that chapter. But I don't think that's where it started. And I do think this brilliance of the Birkman came out of a place of pain. I think a lot of advancements in the world happen that way.
Yeah, I think that's how the best products are made, is by understanding the root of the pain point.
Right. There's something uncomfortable happening, and so we come up with the solution. And for him, it was, if I can understand people, maybe I can connect to them, and maybe I can feel valued and loved.
Wow. And in his understanding that he was seeking for himself has created so much understanding around the world now.
And I think it's also important to consider this was in the 50s.
Yeah,
like
this was
these
a
were
very long
not
time.
things.
This isn't things people talked
not
about.
Not at all. Like, even I think you and I sometimes worry that talking about these things today is like, is it too out there, or does it feel too soft? I mean, this was just unheard of. There wasn't the vernacular for it. It was actually seen as controversial, because trying to quantify what people saw as humans, now that seems almost laughable, the world that we live in right now.
Right.
But these were thoughts that if people were having them, they certainly were not talking about them.
What we basically get from this story is the understanding that Dr. Birkman was able to make massive advancements in helping people have more accurate perceptions. Yes. And that's exactly why we're saying seen by Birkman, because the power of the Birkman method is having this more accurate understanding.
Yes.
This is what we believe is the first pillar, the first step of creating a space for people to feel seen. And it's only the cognitive part.
Right.
So what I mean by that is that this is an important first step that doesn't create an experience of people feeling seen unless you follow it up with empathy and action.
Yeah. So let's talk about that framework.
So the framework, really, it begins with understanding there is a ton of acceleration that the Birkman information, by making the invisible visible through personality and perception, can help create that conversation so much faster for people.
And I like the word acceleration, because you may get there by spending a lot of time with the person or through trial and error.
Or even great questions.
Or great questions, absolutely. But I think, the fact that if I can have this data on you, that immediately I can start saying, tell me about this, that expedites this feeling of understanding.
The Birkman is a massive accelerant when it comes to understanding. There are still some foundations that we need to have in place to make sure that that's going to work. But again, that's a really important first piece, by making the invisible visible. The second piece, and this is where the human comes in, is where we respond with care.
Yeah.
And if the Birkman helps people say, you get me, the emotional side of it is being able to say, you care about what I'm experiencing, even if you haven't experienced what I'm experiencing, and you may never experience what I'm experiencing.
Right.
So, both of us, we live more in the emotional side of the world, if that that wasn't obvious already. But for us, being able to understand and appreciate and empathize with people who do live in a world that is just much less feelings oriented.
Yeah.
And they feel comfortable when things stay objective and practical and logical. And to honor that experience means that we do have to take off our lens for a moment and really try to appreciate where that person is coming from.
Yeah.
And it's like to say, hey, I totally understand why all of this like stuff that we've been talking about has put you into stress right now, because it's a lot of uncomfortable feelings and just a lot of mess that people are going through right now.
And based on everything you've been through and who you are, your
Yeah.
reaction makes perfect sense.
It makes perfect
Yeah, it
sense.
makes perfect sense to me why you would feel that way
Absolutely.
and why you would react that way.
Yeah. And so to be able to see somebody's Birkman and see, hey, this person does live more in the practical side of the world, of course it makes sense for them to be uncomfortable with this situation. Those are the first two steps. The third part of it is really important, and I think obvious to some people and probably less obvious to others, just depending on how you're wired. You get me, you care, and then actually doing something that shows the person that they mattered.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, it almost just looks like a performance.
Mm.
And I think that people are sick of performances.
Yeah.
Yes, we want to be able to do those first two things, but it's like, okay, you learned this about me and you said that you cared, but if you don't do anything about it,
So what is
did you
the
really
action?
care?
Like, what are some of the examples of
Well,
how do we...
So that's a good question, because I think action can feel like a really big word. Sometimes it's just a subtle shift in how you either do something in that moment or maybe change a little tweak in your behavior moving forward. But just to carry on this example, the person who was feeling uncomfortable in those conversations, we've acknowledged this. And next time it's saying, hey, I'm going to be more mindful about when I bring these things up around you. And of course, we're still going to have to talk about this, but maybe we keep it to a certain time or like a certain meeting where these things come up, because I want to validate that it's hard and acknowledge that we're still going to have to do it. But let's make sure that we kind of agree when we're going to bring up the hard parts of the conversation so that you can be all in.
Like a huge action, but it's that next step of there's something that's going to be done differently based on the new information that
and
we
really
have.
like I think it's a commitment between the two people, and I think some of the lift on this part can be on the other person, and it can be like, hey, what would be helpful for you for me to do differently next time? Because if I don't understand that experience, I can list off, 5, 10, 20 different actions. They may not land just right. The person might even say, just give me a heads up next time.
Yeah.
And then I can be all in.
We've been talking about, obviously, this topic a lot recently, and that was a shift for me to think about the fact that being seen is not a one-direction activity. It's like a co-creation between two people.
It has to be co-created, and both people have to be all in on it, and they have to want it, because let's say there's an employee and a manager.
Yeah.
If the manager is trying to create a space for an employee to feel seen, but they haven't given any information or haven't been honest or haven't felt either comfortable or willing to be vulnerable with the manager, it's very hard for the manager to create a space for someone to feel seen when they're not like willing to put themselves into the window.
We haven't said this yet, I don't think, but allowing someone to see you means being vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Right. So
it
it's not possible. Like, you can't be seen in your wholeness if you're not willing to kind of show maybe the parts of you that either letting your guard down or parts that you're less sure about. And so that's the piece of the person's unwilling to be vulnerable. It doesn't matter what space you create. The action's not possible.
Right. And I think it is important to say that, because from like a victim mindset, you might be thinking, if you're not seen, oh, well, it's because they don't care, or they're not trying, or they don't get me. But it's really hard to do those things if the person who wants to feel seen isn't letting themselves be seen.
So is there a way to break that up? It's like on one side, the person has to be vulnerable for this kind of seen experience to happen. and the other person has to have the intention of wanting to see the person?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So that's the two different parts.
Yeah, I think that they both, it's not on the giver, it's not just on the receiver. Both of those things have to come together, and it's really a chemistry.
Right.
And it's an experience that we're going to create together and a feeling that we're going to create together.
And the example you gave is about a manager trying to create that space, right? And the employee not leaning in with vulnerability, so it's not possible. But the opposite side of that is that you are vulnerable and you do share something, and then it's not received or validated. And that, I think, is where the painful part comes in, right?
No,
that's where it's like, that's
painful.
scary. I put myself out there and then it was rejected.
Yeah.
And that's definitely not a good feeling.
Right. And so hopefully, as we continue to have these conversations, we can help people with one of these three pieces of feeling seen to make sure that each of those pillars is going to be strong for the receiver of it. And then for the person creating it, it's like, here are some tips to be able to help yourself with these different pieces, and also why it's valuable for you in your personal life, in your work life. By, people are super busy, and it's the idea of go slow to go fast. Put 5 more minutes into the conversation, and I promise you there will be an ROI on it.
Yeah.
All of these things have to line up, but I think in the fast world that we live in, go slow to go fast, and take time to do these things can go a really long way.
So just to summarize, our framework is understanding, empathy, and action.
Yes.
Those are the 3 pieces.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think it's fair to say there's another piece that comes before the equation, which is this honest expression from the individual.
Yeah.
And let's acknowledge that it is a risk.
Yeah.
But you don't really get much good in life without taking one.
Yeah, the connection's only possible with the risk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so feeling good about the framework. Now let's bring it back to Birkman. And you've been using Birkman for over 20 years. You took the Birkman even longer than that ago. Do you have a personal experience that you want to share about how Birkman has actually helped you feel seen?
Yes, and it is a long story because it goes over a long span of time. I am Dr. Birkman's granddaughter, and so because of that, I had exposure to Birkman earlier than probably most people will. And so the first time I took the Birkman, I was 18. And I remember when I was getting the results, it was like, you're very sensitive, you're very emotional. And it was like, that none of that was a surprise to me. Even though the Birkman framed it as a strength, I didn't believe them to necessarily be strengths. Like, it wasn't something I wholeheartedly bought into. And it actually wasn't until about 5 years ago when I went out and did my own consulting firm. And there was multiple conversations like this, but one day, it clicked, how that does. You have to have enough evidence for something to finally absorb it. And we were on a break, and I was working with a group of executives, and I think the CEO came up to me and said, how do you see what you're seeing? And I was like, I don't know what you mean. And he said, well, you notice and you call out things and you ask questions that I'm not sure how do you know those dynamics are there? To me, it's because I see how someone looks uncomfortable, or I see someone that wants to say something that they won't say it, or shifts in their body language. And one of my kind of hallmarks of my consulting brand was to be a truth teller. And so I would always say, if you don't want things to be called out, you shouldn't hire me, because that's how I do it. I don't know how to do it any other way. And people think they want the truth, and then sometimes the truth is very painful. But having these conversations, it clicked for me that it's my self-consciousness. I have this very high self-conscious score. I'm very tuned in, sometimes overly tuned in, to what people are thinking, what they're thinking about me, how they're feeling. And that radar is what made me a good consultant. And it's funny that something that, I still, if you said you could change one of your Birkman scores, it would still probably be my self-consciousness. But it was the first time that I was like, oh, wow. Not only is this a strength, I think this is why I'm good at what I do. And that happened 5 years ago, right? So sometimes the journey to self-acceptance takes a while.
Yeah.
But I think especially for some of us, it's easier to see the hard part of the attribute than sometimes it is the gift in the attribute. And maybe that's my genetics, right? Coming from my grandfather.
Right.
Yeah.
Seems like he may have had the same
Right.
experience
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, exactly. What about you? Tell me an example for you from your point of view.
I think for me, I took the Birkman for the first time in 2013, and I remember it vividly. The consultant opens the report for me, and we go through the whole thing, and we get to the emotional energy component. And essentially what it says is you're an emotional person living in an emotional world.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I am. Like, I literally am. And I think that I had always thought that for my whole life, but I never knew that it was actually true.
But you'd been told that too, right? Isn't that feedback you would get from people?
Yeah,
growing
that
up?
you're like, that I was, like creative and expressive and all of the gifts that come
good
from
parts.
the emotion. But then it's also like, and you tend to worry sometimes and maybe like overreact to things. And so, yes, I had always gotten this feedback. But the thing that I didn't realize, and if you have taken the Birkman, if you haven't, there's a page of the report that looks like a mountain. And it's like, you're kind of living over here. And I was like, yeah, I feel like I always have lived over here. But then it goes on to say, and there's all these people who also live on this more practical side of the world
That you don't even see.
that you don't even see.
And that's maybe half of them are over
Yeah,
there.
and actually, there's more than half of the world over there.
Yeah.
So I was like, gosh, no wonder that, like, for me personally, it is so natural to, like, lean into the creativity in this type of conversation. And it takes so much work to try and just, like, remain practical and logical about things because it's not how I'm wired.
Yeah.
And so I think that the validation
Yeah.
that the Birkman gave me in that moment, that was like, yes, this is your gift and this is hard for you, was just so validating because from the side of the strength and the challenge, it saw my experience.
But you said the other day, and I thought this was interesting, maybe because it also relates to myself, but you said, I felt like everyone experienced emotion in the same way. And so I was just less effective at managing the emotion.
That's what I thought.
But then seeing like, oh no, like there's people that their world is not emotional.
Yeah.
Like their experience is not emotional. So it's not that they're managing it differently. It's that they're
Right.
experiencing the
They're
whole
experiencing it so
the world
differently.
differently,
And not
yeah.
as, of course, everybody has
emotions,
feelings and
yes.
has emotions, but not as deeply as what Birkman
Yeah.
describes when we talk about this higher emotional energy side of the world. But that's exactly what I thought. I thought if I just tried harder, then I
can
would be able
manage
to manage
my
this
emotions
better.
better.
And we'll get to in another episode that, yes, of course, part of the idea with Birkman is we want people to experience growth and be able to flex, but not fundamentally become a different person.
Or not honor who they are.
Or not honor who they are. And that's where I felt that for the first time, all of these things like clicked for me. And I was like, it was never really about like me not trying hard enough because I was trying
it wasn't
to do
a
those
skill
things.
that you were lacking.
It was just the way that I see
It's
the world
the way you're wired. Yeah.
and the way that I'm wired. And
Yeah.
I think like being able to have that understanding from the Birkman, then I can actually see myself better and be more empathetic with myself.
Yeah.
And then to move to that third step, it's like, okay, now that you understand this, you can take different actions.
Right.
But before you understand it, it's almost like you're just trying to figure out the problem.
Yeah.
You're not actually moving forward productively because everything just feels like kind of disorienting based on the feedback that you're getting.
Yeah.
So I think that was obviously an impactful experience for me and just feeling so understood. And there's so many components.
It was your Birkman scene moment.
That was my Birkman
One of
scene
your
moment.
first, maybe.
One of the first. What else I would love to hear is any other notable or meaningful experiences that you've had with people in team workshops or with executives, because I think it might be easy for us to say like, yes, like we've worked through these things working at Birkman, but how is it for like just the average person on the team? How does this help them?
Yeah. I think it goes back to helping them articulate who they are and what they need that gives them more control over actually managing their environment and not feeling like they're just having to passively react to it, but actually being able to create an environment that is going to help them be productive in an intentional way. I mean, there's so many stories. And that's why when we were talking about our podcast, the idea of being seen kept coming up, because I've had 60-year-old executive men cry to be like, this makes sense now. Like this, to your point, I couldn't figure it out. Like I put so much energy into it and it's created so much pain, but this was it. Like it was this thing right here. Now it all makes sense and the click happens. Or married couples who they would say, you know, my husband wakes up in the morning and bangs pots in the kitchen just to make a point out of me sleeping in. And they do it intentionally and it's hurtful. And then they see their Birkmans and it's like, oh, you just have tons of physical energy and I have less. And it's like, yeah, I just wanted to get started on the day. It was never personal. Unfortunately, a human tendency is that we tend to interpret things with negative intent, right? We're very susceptible to assuming if somebody does something that hurts us, we're very quick to create a story that they did that intentionally and willingly. I believe, and I cannot back this up statistically, but I believe 99% or more of conflict, any type of conflict, work conflict, friend conflict, marriage conflict, you know, any person-to-person conflict, I think 99% of it is down to you're interpreting the situation differently. And if you had the other person's point of view, you would have handled it completely different, right? But you don't. And that's actually something that makes all of this so fascinating and also so difficult, is that every single person is perceiving and processing the world in a completely unique way. Every single person. And given that, it actually surprises me that we get as much done as we do, because that's incredibly complicated. I've done workshops with teams and we kind of go through all of this, and everyone's Birkman is different. You know, one of my favorite data points is we haven't found 2 identical Birkmans in our database of the millions of reports that we have. That should impress you. But what's even more impressive is that's just the Birkman piece. Like that's not family systems. That's not your history. That's not what country did you come from. So all of that's just adding layers and layers and layers that's making that perceptual gap even more intense. And so I'll be facilitating a workshop and someone will be like, this is really complicated. This is really difficult. And it's like, yeah, it is. And we didn't create the problem. We're highlighting the problem. Like you were always operating in this world. You just didn't realize it. And the assumption that people are seeing what you see and making sense of the things that how you make sense is the most dangerous thing you can do if you want relationships and connection.
Absolutely. So I love that. And I was just thinking about how if this first important piece is understanding, then assumptions is what gets you further away from understanding, and leading with curiosity is what gets you closer.
Yeah.
So why don't you take us through that a little bit?
I'm glad you said that, because obviously the Birkman is a big part of what we do, but everything that we're talking about, you don't need a Birkman for.
Right.
And what the one thing, like, and it's so obvious and it's so simple, and yet it's so absent in most of what you see, is if you just ask questions, like, tell me what happened back there, or, how did you feel about this? Or, how did that make sense to you? Just being curious and assuming you don't know will get you so much further.
Right.
And asking questions then requires the person to potentially open up and be vulnerable. And now you're creating the environment for someone to feel seen. So I in no way want to say that you have to have a Birkman to be able to do this, because you absolutely don't. I think it makes it easier and it accelerates the process.
Right.
But if you don't know, assume you don't know and ask a lot of questions.
The only thing you have to have is a question.
Is curiosity.
And the Birkman starts with 298 questions.
Yeah, that's true. It does. It is curiosity in the form of an assessment.
It's curiosity in the form of an assessment, and someone opens up, and those are vulnerable questions that they have to answer.
Yes. When I meet someone and I finally get them to take the Birkman, it's like Christmas morning for me, because you never know, right? It's people will say well, you can probably predict a person's Birkman now. And I'm like, absolutely not.
Way.
If anyone tells you they can, refer them to me because it's not possible.
Right.
Like Dr. Birkman couldn't do it. So
neither can his granddaughter.
or his granddaughter. Yes. Yeah. So I do think that underscores the point. In the absence of information is curiosity.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I think that's a really good tip and wonderful inspiration, because this is very, very hard to do in your life, especially in the workplace. There's so much friction that's just up against people on this happening. And I think part of it, at least to me personally, always feels like we're just like, everybody wants a metric. Everybody wants things to happen faster. And taking time to do these 3 steps and making people helping them feel seen, creating a space for them to feel seen, seems absolutely counterintuitive, I think, to a lot of people. But it's going to allow you to get to those metrics in a more productive way. It's going to help you get the result, because in the absence of this, you may not even get to the result that you're looking for.
It's something that it's hard because we live in this space and we know it's true. It to me is an absolute truth, everything that we're talking about connection and vulnerability and curiosity. But as a leader of a company, if you aren't able to create spaces where people can be seen, they're not going to bring their whole self forward. And that means you're losing out on, you're paying them like for the whole person to show up. And it means you're not going to get access to that whole person showing up. And it's because you're not creating the space. And so much of the time it's like, well, how is this going to, impact ROI? Or what are, like to your point, what are the metrics that's going to show that this is worthwhile? And it's like when you can root it back to kind of where we started, like it's biological.
Right.
When the person is not feeling seen, their body is going into a less effective mode of operation. Their nervous system is dysregulated. You're not going to get as good work. So it's really like you want the best version of the person that you've hired. And this is how you create the environment that allows the best version of that person to show up. And if you don't do that, can they still be productive and get work done? Absolutely. But are you paying for something that you're probably not getting? 100%.
Well, and to me, the bigger issue today is that people are solving hard problems.
Right. They don't have an answer.
That don't have an answer.
We talk about that a lot with our team. It's like there is no answer to this.
There is no answer. And I think sometimes they think we have the answer.
No,
and it's like,
don't.
Guys, we don't have the answer. That's why we're a team.
And we don't know if it's possible.
We all need to be able to figure this out together. And so even for us as leaders, we want our team to feel seen, because we can't solve problems and move forward without all of us being totally in sync and feeling really good together, because we have to bring our best selves forward to the work. Because the opportunity and the challenge ahead of us is so much bigger than all of us as individuals.
And I think that's obviously been true, for the last several decades, but it's like we're sitting now with this moment,
be more true
exactly
today.
Where it's like you can't go 5 minutes without talking about AI and just the way it's going to change the world in ways that, back to, no one knows, like no one has the answer. We can all speculate about how it's going to happen, but it's like it's always been so true, and yet it's like we're sitting at this like little moment where it's all about to get exponentially more complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to have people and humans come together and allow each other to feel seen and solve hard problems and do meaningful work, I think that does bring so much purpose to people.
It's when you say that, I'm like struck by how rare I think that actually is, and how people are just desperate for it.
It's so
like
rare.
Purpose and connection and going to work and feeling fulfilled. Like I sadly feel like it's the exception to the rule. And I think that shows things have to change.
I think that you're absolutely right. And that it just makes me sad but motivated, because I think that we can get there. It just takes intention and it takes work.
Well,
and it takes doing something differently.
Understanding that it's important. Right. And that you're going to be better, your company is going to be better, your marriage, your life. It's all like there's only an upside to all of this.
It's hard and it's important and it's rewarding. So I
don't even think it's like, not to correct you, but it's like it's not just important, it's necessary.
It is necessary.
Like it's like we were talking yesterday about, is it a luxury? And it's like no, it's like
not.
Absolutely, to be seen is not a luxury. It's actually an essential part of and I think that's where we're seeing what we're seeing right now happening in the world is it's the pain of this need is not fundamentally being met for a lot of people.
What actions do you have that someone could start doing right now to be able to help with this?
You know, not to be cliche, but Gandhi says the change in the world starts with you. And I think it starts with you. I think the more you start showing up for people and really like trying to ask them questions and allow them to be in their space and tell you about their experience and to say, I believe you. Like, I believe you that that's exciting. I believe you that that's really hard. I don't know where else you can start, right? I think it has to start with you and then understand the importance of that. You know, we're both moms now, and I think our kids growing up with us having this mindset is a completely different experience than I think generations before have had.
Yeah.
And so I do think that it's turning. I think that the world is going to keep going this way. I certainly think businesses will continue to go this way, and the most successful businesses will get this early.
So do you have any final thoughts?
I do. And when we were talking about our goal for having these conversations and having this podcast, we had said that if somebody listens to a conversation and has a slight shift, that to us, that would be successful. Like we've done what we wanted to do and what we showed up to do. And the potential shift that I want people to invite people to think about is that reflecting on your life and where in your life there's places where you don't feel seen. Either you want to be more valued, you don't feel like you're being acknowledged the way that you want to be. You know, it could be any relationship in your life. And instead of kind of waiting passively to feel seen and to be acknowledged, is there a shift you could make in that relationship that may change the dynamics and actually create a space for both of you to be seen? I don't think in every relationship, but I think in a lot, when someone's feeling unseen, the other person probably is too in some way. And so we kind of tend to focus on like where it's painful for us or uncomfortable for us. And I think it's easy to go into, well, they're not doing something. And my invitation would be, is there a shift for you? Like maybe if you showed up differently, or maybe if you got more curious about their life, you know, is there an action you can take that helps to create an environment where those conversations are happening that creates a more meaningful relationship for both of you?
I love those closing thoughts and appreciate the conversation with you today. Thank you to those of you who've listened, and see you next time.
See you next time. That's it for this episode of Seen by Birkman. If this changed how you see yourself or someone else, it worked. Share it with someone who needs the conversation. See you next time.